ladies, gents, and non-binary mates, and welcome back to Beauty in the Bookcase. Now, before we get started, make sure you follow me on all my social media so you know exactly what I'm getting up to when I'm not here on YouTube. And before you say anything, yes, I have too many books for my bookcase. Also, I don't think you can see it because it's like angled, but this thing is like skewed that way. And one of these days, this is just gonna collapse on me. So today we are finally concluding my series on ranking the best opening lines for novels. So I found a list online of the best 100. We are doing today 75 through 100. Just a quick breakdown of how I've been doing this is I have a tier list that goes from angelic sounds to Y, and at the end, essentially, I decide which ones I want to move up to angelic. So I usually work from the love it down to the Y categories, and then I move stuff up at the end and rearrange them sometimes. Now, I do want to make clear that obviously this ranking is based on my opinions. I think obviously as readers and as writers, we all have different interests, different things that really, that we gravitate towards. So none of this is meant to be kind of like judging the actual talent of the writers or being like, my opinion is right and anyone who disagrees is wrong. Which is why actually down in the description you are going to find the tier list. So I have one for each of the 4 parts, and then I have a master tier list, because I would love for you guys to fill out the tier list yourself, and then you can tag me on Instagram or on Twitter, and we can see where we differ and where we don't, and obviously you can always sound off on the comments below. Now, if you haven't seen the 3 parts before this, I'm going to put the links in the description, and then I will also have them somewhere up in the cards throughout the video. So without further ado, let's get started. Rose Macaulay, The Towers of Trebek. "Take my camel, dear," said my Aunt Dot, as she climbed down from this animal on her return from High Mass. So I think this line does feel a little bit less unexpected to me in terms of like there being a camel, just because of the cover art. I think that kind of might influence a few of my initial impressions of it. That said, I think the idea of, having this camel and going to High Mass, there is kind of a notion of affluence potentially, and even perhaps the idea of somebody being displaced, so they might be originally from, a country that doesn't have camels, and then they've moved to this place, and, maybe affording a camel is quite a easy thing, but it could also be a sign of somebody who has the means to afford that. And I think it's also interesting that, we have the fact that the protagonist is with the aunt, so, it does make you wonder as a reader, right? Like, is this, like, are you on vacation? Is your aunt like the person who's taking care of you? Have you just moved to this country and this is like your connection? So I think there is something a little bit intriguing there. That said, I don't know that, it doesn't really click with me. I don't feel necessarily like I have an understanding of what's going to happen next, and I don't think that line has given me enough to want to know more. I'm not entirely convinced by the camel. Joseph Conrad, Lord Jim. "He was an inch, perhaps 2, under 6 feet, powerfully built, and he advanced straight at you with a slight stoop of the shoulders, head forward, and a fixed from under stare which made you think of a charging bull." So what I find really interesting about this is that it is a description, and sometimes descriptions might not be the best way to start, just because you don't want to just be like, he was 5'8" with blue eyes. You want your opening line to say a little bit more than just surface level stuff, and I think that it is something really interesting that Joseph Conrad has done here. Is he has provided us with a description, but it's a description that kind of describes a little bit more about the character's character. So, we have this idea of this person being quite powerful maybe, and imposing and almost intimidating. And so it's interesting then, in contrast with whoever the narrator is, because we don't know if this narrator is looking at this person with a sense of awe or admiration at kind of like their toughness and, their grandiosity, so to speak, or if there is maybe like a bit of judgment or even like a bit of insecurity. So I think I'm going to put it in the middle, because again, I don't know that starting off with that description has me like hooked, but it's definitely something that I'd be willing to read into a little bit more. L.P. Hartley, The Go-Between. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. I absolutely love this. I'm putting this on the second tier on Love It, but this is probably going to go up to Angelic Sounds real quick, like the second I'm done. I really love this. I like the fact that it's kind of taken the concept of time, obviously, of the past, and kind of almost put the person's or the narrator's past or the main character's past as something outside of themselves, I think the idea of it being like a foreign country kind of takes a lot of the, responsibility or connection between the speaker and their own past. It is kind of them having to readjust almost to fit the customs or the expectations of their past self to kind of retransition and find a place for themselves in this potentially, in the plot. Russell Hoban, Ridley Walker. On my naming day, when I come 12, I gun front spear and killed a wild boar. He probably been the last wild pig on the Bundle Downs. Anyhow, there hadn't been none for a long time before him, nor I ain't looking to see none again. I'm gonna put this in the next to last category, simply, and this is very much a biased opinion, a biased decision, but I have a really hard time with dialect. Like, books written in dialect, I find them so hard to get through. Instead of feeling like immersed, I just feel pulled out because my brain is just trying to figure out what it's trying to say. That said, about the line itself, I think there is a little bit of mystery. They're talking about being a child and having killed this wild boar and how they haven't seen one since, and they hadn't seen one before that. So I think there might, that might be something that clearly comes into play, like what has happened in the character's life or in their community, that this was such a rarity, and how has that kind of moment changed their life. So, William Gaddis, A Frolic of His Own. Justice. You get justice in the next world. In this world, you have the law. So this one as well, I'm going to put it in Love It, but I know I'm going to end up moving it to the top tier. I really, really loved this. I think it just does a really good job of establishing a concrete world. We have this kind of realist, potentially nihilistic narrator who is very disillusioned with the world around them, and they feel that there is a lot of injustice and a lot of unfairness, and almost like it seems to suggest that the world might be so bogged down in bureaucracy and in these like black and whites that justice isn't really being made. And I do also like that illusion of justice only existing in the next world. I think that it's one of those things that is quite open for interpretation. I can read into that and think, oh, well, it's the idea that once a person dies, that's when they pay for for their sins, so to speak. Or also the fact that the victim then can only find justice and peace from their trauma or whatever they've experienced, right, by no longer being in this world and finally being able to walk away from it instead of carrying that weight around. J.G. Ballard, Crash. Vaughn died yesterday in his last car crash. So I'm kind of on the fence with this one, so I'm going to put it in the middle. I do think that it's really interesting that the author took something that's quite common, talking about or writing about death and all that, but they added that little bit at the end, right, to sort of make it different, to sort of show that this wasn't just any old thing. So I think it's really interesting that it's the last car crash, so we can already know then that Vaughn was clearly a person who was very accident prone, potentially reckless, and so that kind of, but perhaps they were a bit self-assured, perhaps they thought that this has happened before, I don't need to be saved because I've always been fine, and then they weren't. But with that said, I also think that because we have no connection as the reader to Vaughn. I don't entirely understand why I should necessarily care. But at the same time, it is a good example of why first lines shouldn't be the be-all, end-all of a book, right? I think that as writers, we often feel the pressure that we have to have this like amazing, iconic, perfect opening line that needs to get your reader hooked, and I think that it doesn't need to sell the plot. I think it just needs to sell them the next sentence, and then each sentence needs to continue doing that. Jody Smith, I capture the castle. I write this sitting in the kitchen sink. So I'm actually going to put this in the next to last tier. I think it does something a bit similar to the one we just saw, where you have kind of an expected phrase. So, I was right, I'm writing this, but then you have them from inside the kitchen sink. I do think that the idea of them being inside of it instead of like on top or in front of, it does kind of maybe suggest that this person is quite small, or that like the rules of this universe don't necessarily match up with what we know. But at the same time, I feel like there's just not enough for me to want to be invested in it, I think that while that's an interesting fact, I can easily move on from it and not feel that I'm missing out on something. Catherine Dunn, Geek Love. When your mama was the geek, my dreamlets, Papa would say, she made the nipping off of noggins such a crystal mystery that the hens themselves yearned toward her, waltzing around her, hypnotized with longing. So I think for now I'm going to put this in the middle tier. We do start off with some dialogue, which I think is the first one that we've seen today that does that. And, we have their father speaking quite highly of the mother. We get this kind of picture that the main character's mom is somebody that people are drawn to, they're attracted to. She knows how to captivate the people around her. She knows how to make things really interesting and intriguing and pull people's attention. So I think that's definitely interesting. I'm not 100% sold, but I'm open to reading more and finding out what the story is actually about. John Barth, The Sodweed Factor. In the last years of the 17th century, there was to be found among the fops and fools of the London coffee houses one rangy, gangling flitch called Ebenezer Cook, more ambitious than talented, and yet more talented than prudent, who, like his friends in folly, all of whom were supposed to be educating at Oxford or Cambridge, had found the sound of Mother English more fun to game with than her sense to labor over, and so, rather than applying himself to the pains of scholarship, had learned the knack of versifying, and ground out choirs of couplets after the fashion of the day, afroth with Joves and Jupiters, acclang with jarring rhymes, and string taut with similes stretched to the snapping point. I will say I do struggle with opening lines that are quite long, and there is one coming up that's even longer than this. So let's keep that in mind. With that said, though, I did really enjoy the information that we were given, so despite the fact that I'm just like, it's a lot of information all at once, I do feel that it could, putting it in the love it tier, because I do think there's something really compelling about it. I think that although sometimes really long opening lines can be kind of exposition heavy and a bit disorienting, I think we get interesting enough details, right? There are things that are relevant to the plot, there are things that are relevant to the character that matter beyond just kind of general descriptions of the character or the setting. I think, we want to know what led Ebenezer to going into poetry instead of scholarship, and clearly they were easily influenced by their friends. So is there something that's kind of causing tension now between the family who had this expectation of Ebenezer becoming an academic? So I think that's something that it does really, really well. James Crumbly, The Last Good Kiss. When I finally caught up with Abraham Treherne, he was drinking beer with an alcoholic bulldog named Fireball Roberts in a ramshackle joint just outside of Sonoma, California, drinking the heart right out of a fine spring afternoon. So I do sort of get like noir vibes from this, but I do think that this adds a lot of interesting details about the surrounding and the relationships that we're to expect from this book. So it definitely kind of, again, I think it goes in the middle for me, just because I do think that the details that we're provided with, right, we're kind of informed that these are dodgy places and potentially dodgy people. You know, we don't know if the person that the narrator is catching up to is the suspect, or if there's somebody who's actually going to help them do whatever needs to be done. But yeah, I mean, I think I think there's something really creative about, you know, identifying these people. However, because it's not directly attached to our narrator, you know, we don't have any sense of how the narrator feels about catching up to these people. We don't know if they're angry, if they're excited, if they're frustrated. I think had we had one, you know, detail that focused on the narrator's kind of reaction to like catching up to these people, I think that would have kind of pushed it up for me a little bit. William Faulkner, intruder in the desk. It was just noon that Sunday morning when the sheriff reached the jail with Lucas Beachtown, though the whole town, the whole county too for that matter, had known since the night before that Lucas had killed a white man. I mean, this is definitely intriguing for me. This is something, again, that I'm probably going to put in the top at the end, but right now we're going to keep it at love it. I think there's a sense of ambiguity, and that might just, again, be me projecting. But I think that there is this idea of, you know, obviously everybody knows, you know, it's a small town, everyone knows everyone, so if something bad happens, it's quite stressful, and it makes people very uncomfortable. But then, you know, it is kind of this idea of, since it was specified that Lucas had killed a white man, it kind of suggests that Lucas is a person of color. And then in there you start to wonder, you know, was this, you know, a savage murder of somebody who was well respected in the community, or was this some type of person kind of taking justice into their own hands to make up for whatever the person who was killed had done, because they didn't have that trust in the justice system. Robert Graves, I Claudius. I Tiberius Claudius Drusus Nero Germanicus, this, that, and the other, for I shall not trouble you yet with all of my titles, who was once, and not so long ago either, known to my friends and relatives and associates as Claudius the Idiot, or that Claudius, or Claudius the Stammerer, or Claudius, or at best as poor Uncle Claudius, am now about to write this strange history of my life, starting from my earliest childhood and continuing year by year until I reach the fateful point of change where, some 8 years ago, at the age of 51, I suddenly found myself caught in what I may call the golden predicament, from which I have never since become disentangled. So this one, again, mixed bag. I think, again, just there's a lot that's being said. However, I think there's something really interesting about my reaction to this, because I'm still gonna put it and love it, but let me talk you through the process. So I think it starts off interesting enough. I mean, we do have kind of like, you know, them presenting themselves with, you know, kind of a, I don't know, like the idea of being quite important. You know, there's kind of an authority in the way that he introduces himself, and then that's juxtaposed with the way that, you know, the pity and the mockery that people treated him with. But then, you know, I think it goes into the middle, and it kind of lost me there when it's just kind of like, I'm about to write this, blah, blah, blah. It felt a little bit too exposition-y to me. But then, you know, we have it, turn it around, and we're talking about the golden predicament, and I think that's definitely key, is, you know, two key things that I want to learn more about, right? I want to know what happened to this person that they went from being, you know, Claudius the Idiot to being somebody who's presenting themselves in a way that suggests that they're quite important and respectable in the community, as well as at 51, what happened, what is this golden predicament? I think that's definitely something that kind of pulled me back in. Charles Johnson, Middle Passage. Of all the things that drive men to sea, the most common disaster I've come to learn is women. Now, I don't know if this is just me, but I was like, if the genders were like reversed and it was like, this was a little bit more elegant, it gave me like Jane Austen vibes for some reason. I don't know. Let me know if you agree or if I'm just crazy. But yeah, I mean, this is probably, you know, I love it kind of category. I mean, I think it's quite simple, but I think that's why it's effective. I think there's quite a lot of weight to it, because we're already being told that either the main character or, even all the people on this ship, on this adventure, on this crew, are people who have suffered heartache, and so clearly it's going to be a story that's going to be dealing with those emotions. Saul Bellow, The Adventures of Augie March. I am an American, Chicago born, Chicago, that somber city, and go at things I have taught myself, freestyle, and will make the record in my own way. First to knock, first admit it. Sometimes an innocent knock, sometimes a not so innocent. I don't know, I think when I first read this, I wasn't as convinced about it, and I was going to put it in but I think I might actually put it in love it. I think that there's something really interesting, because here, again, we are getting description, but it's relevant description. It's not just, it's like plot moving or plot relevant description. We're being already told that this character is somebody who is a go-getter, somebody who seems to be quite assertive, and somebody who's learned to sort of, kind of like stack the cards in their favor. They know when being nice is going to work, and they also know when they have to be a little bit more assertive and a little bit tougher. They know how to toe that line to get what they want, and I think that's something that's really, really interesting, that makes you want to invest time and energy in this character. Sinclair Lewis Babbitt. The towers of Cenath aspired above the morning mist, austere towers of steel and cement and limestone, sturdy as cliffs and delicate as silver rods. As a person who enjoys writing description, I do enjoy this, but I think approaching it just as, if this was just a description that I read in the middle of the book, that would be something that I would enjoy, but having this be the first line, I think it's not detailed enough. I think that it's a little bit too generic, or a little bit too general about the world. That said, like I said, I do enjoy it as just a bit of description. I think it does a really good job of kind of creating this quite like cold, mechanical, kind of isolated industrial world, right? I feel very much like this blandness to it, this solitude almost. It's kind of giving off these vibes that this is a world that has like little humanity left to it. I think I'm going to put it in the middle for now, and then I change my mind later. I might move it to love it, because I do like it. I just don't know how convincing it would be as a first line. John Hawke's Second Skin. I will tell you in a few words who I am. Lover of the hummingbird that darts to the flower beyond the rotted sill where my feet are propped. Lover of bright needlepoint and the bright stitching fingers of humorless old ladies bent to their sweet and infamous designs. Lover of parasols made from the same puffy stuff as a young girl's underdrawers. Still lover of that small naval boat which somehow survived the distressing years of my life between her decks and in her pilot house. And also lover of poor dear Black Sonny, my mess boy, fellow victim and confidant, and of my wife and child, but most of all, lover of my harmless and sanguine self. Not sure how I feel about this one, so when I'm not sure, it goes in the middle. I felt like 2/3 of that could have just been information that was given to us later, I think there's, it establishes kind of quirks and little, it kind of softens the character a bit, but do I need to know in the opening line, again, because it is a bit longer, do I need to know every single thing that they enjoy? Not so much. I feel like that final third when, talking about the ship and their wife and their child and the mess boy, I think that says a lot more about the character, and that's really what made me want to kind of invest my time and care about this protagonist, as opposed to if I just had, the first 2/3. Raphael Sabatini Scaramouche. He was born with a gift of laughter and a sense that the world was mad. Now this I really enjoyed. Honestly, I kind of had a similar reaction when I first read this to the justice line from earlier. I think that, again, it's sort of setting up this world very clearly, right? We have a protagonist who's quite unhappy or detached from the world, or kind of navigating it, feeling like no one's seeing the world the way that they do. But despite that, I think despite the fact that they think that the world is kind of full of madness, they have this gift of laughter, right? They're quite jovial. They're not bogged down by the negativity or the toxicity or the darkness of the world around them. So I think it would be, it's definitely like an interesting character to put into perhaps quite a dark world. So yeah, I think this is definitely going to go in the top for me because those tiny details. Again, it was short, but it was so effective that I think that's definitely what kind of puts it up there for me. Rob Biddulph, Blown Away. Psychics can see the color of time. It's blue. Now, I think this is definitely kind of the most, like, absurd one that we've seen. You kind of have this fantastical description of people being able to see the color of time. However, it does seem that kind of like, that more fantastical or metaphysical or whatever you want to call it aspect is being laid on top of quite a real world. So I think, it definitely opens the door for, is this character going to say that they believe in these psychics or do they not? And clearly it suggests that the color blue and time are going to play quite a role here. I don't know. I think the more I think about it, the more it's kind of like a middle ground one for me. Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. In the town, there were two mutes, and they were always together. Honestly, this is the first one I think I'm just going to put at the bottom. And not in a way of just like, this is the worst thing I've ever read in my life. I'm kind of missing why this is special, right? So you have two mutes, and the fact that they would gravitate towards each other makes sense to me, right? It makes sense that if you live in a community of people who don't have the same challenge, struggles, disabilities as you would connect with the person who does, because you can share in those experiences and kind of help each other out. So I think if we had something like in this town there were two mutes and they hated each other, that would be more interesting. I can't find the conflict, I think, is the problem, right? And plot is conflict. So I think that's kind of what's kind of pulled it down so much for me. Raymond Fetterman, Double or Nothing. Once upon a time, 2 or 3 weeks ago, a rather stubborn and determined middle-aged man decided to record for posterity, exactly as it happened, word by word and step by step, the story of another man, for indeed what is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. A somewhat paranoid fellow, unmarried, unattached, and quite irresponsible, who had decided to lock himself in a room, a furnished room, with a private bath, cooking facilities, a bed, a table, and at least one chair, in New York City for a year, 365 days to be precise, to write the story of another person, a shy young man about of 19 years old, who, after the war, the Second World War, had come to America, the land of opportunities, from France, under the sponsorship of his uncle, a journalist, fluent in 5 languages, who himself had come to America from Europe, Poland it seems, though this was not clearly established some time during the war, after a series of rather gruesome adventures, and who, at the end of the war, wrote to the father, his cousin by marriage, of the young man whom he considered as a nephew, curious to know if he, the father, and his family had survived the German occupation, and indeed was deeply saddened to learn, in a letter from the young man, a long and touching letter, written in English, not by the young man, however, who did not know a damn word of English, but by a good friend of his who had studied English in school, that his parents both, his father and mother, and his 2 sisters, one older and the other younger than he, had been deported, they were Jewish, to a German concentration camp, Auschwitz, probably, and never returned. No doubt, having been exterminated deliberately, and that, therefore, the young man, who was now an orphan, a displaced person, who during the war had managed to escape deportation by working very hard on a farm in southern France, would be happy and grateful to be given the opportunity to come to America, that great country he had heard so much about and yet knew so little about, to start a new life, possibly go to school, learn a trade, and become a good, loyal citizen. I just wish it wasn't so long, because I think that there's so much in there that's so interesting and compelling, but I think it just drones on and on and on and feels so stream of consciousness, and there's so many kind of like interjections and information that, again, I think it's stuff that we can learn afterwards, and this just feels like somebody should just take like a stamp that just says exposition, just put it on top of that. So, I mean, as somebody who reads a lot of literature about World War II, obviously I'm interested, but I think it's just there's so much in there that it makes it really hard to follow and really hard to, like, I feel like if that's the first line and it's so long, if the rest of the book is going to be written in that style, I think I would have a really hard time getting through it without just getting overwhelmed. Margaret Atwood, Cat's Eye. Time is not a line, but a dimension, like the dimensions of space. Honestly, I can't really pick out why I like this. I just do. I just really enjoy it, and I immediately went like, this is great, let's put it at the top, I think there's just something really effective about the simplicity of it. I mean, again, we're talking about time, which is a constant subject in literature, but there's kind of this depth added to it, right? It's taking away kind of the chronological idea of time, like the idea that things just happen in a straight line, and kind of treating it as time as something with layers, and there's all these things that happen at the same time to lead things to be the way that they are now. So yeah, I think it just packs a lot in just like a quick little line that definitely makes me feel like I want to invest my time in finding out what these dimensions are all about. Virginia Woolf, Orlando. He, for there could be no doubt of his sex, though the fashion of the time did something to disguise it, was in the act of slicing at the head of a Moor which swung from the rafters. So I think, like with the first one, I think that there is a bit of influence in having seen the cover that makes me kind of put some doubt into this first line, because there's such pressure to confirm this person as a man, right? And it almost feels like it's trying to intentionally misdirect the reader. And, you kind of have this idea of, like, the fashion of the time kind of feminizing them. So, kind of creating this sense of ambiguity, but at the same time being like, no, but, like, for sure, we know this. And then there's obviously the fact they're just, like, slicing someone's head off, which is always a great way to start a book. What did they do? How did you end up with this job? So I think with that, I'm definitely putting it in love it. I think there's just something quite, I don't know, forceful and unique about it. David Lodge, Changing Places. High above the North Pole on the first day of 1969, two professors of English literature approached each other at a combined velocity of 1,200 miles per hour. I feel attacked by this. I read this and it just made me think of, like, math word problems. I was horrendous at those. I could not understand them whatsoever. That said, though, I think there's something really interesting here, right? I think it's written in kind of, to me, a fairly unique way, but it also has this ability of making you go like, but why? Why the North Pole? And particularly, you have two English literature professors. They have potentially no concrete reason to be in the North Pole, and the fact that they're traveling like toward each other does a really good job of either showing there's going to be a big conflict here, right? They're going to clash, or that there's going to be like a relationship being built there because, it was kind of meant to be in a way. So to me, this is probably a top tier. Jean Rhys, Wide Sargasso Sea. They say when trouble comes, close ranks, and so the white people did. I have read this line 10,000 times, and I still have no idea what it's trying to say. I don't know if I'm just not smart enough and I don't get it. If somebody wants to explain it to me in the comments, please do, but I'm taking it to mean that either there was a tension or a trouble started by the white people, or that white people were in trouble because of something. To me, I put this in the bottom. Again, I don't think this is necessarily at the author's fault. I just don't get it. I feel like there's something missing in between. So Sorry. Stephen Crane, The Red Badge of Courage. The cold passed reluctantly from the earth, and the retiring fogs revealed an army stretched out on the hills, resting. So we have description, which we have already established that I enjoy. I kind of think there's something quite beautiful about it, right? You're going into this, a cold passing reluctantly, there's a fog, and then it reveals someone. It feels almost quite cinematic to me, which I really like. But again, I think the fact that they're resting kind of takes a little bit away from the existence of a conflict. I mean, obviously there's a conflict because they're soldiers, there's a war going on. But I don't know, I think for me this is definitely in the middle. Alright, so these are my final rankings. Now make sure that you go down to the description so you can look at all the tier lists and complete them, and tag me on Instagram and Twitter so I can see which ones you really enjoyed and which ones, you know, you were kind of like, that's the worst thing ever. But yeah, what is your favorite line from a book? Mine is actually, we sometimes encounter people, even perfect strangers, who begin to interest us at first sight, somehow suddenly, all at once, before a word has been spoken. That is from Crime and Punishment, which is my favorite book, and I always feel like I'm really pretentious for saying that, but I really do enjoy that book. Alright, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like these. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you know exactly when I upload next, and I will see you all next time.